Well, it's just a small group today. Margaret told me she couldn't come because they have to get all of their portfolio and motion stuff in by the end of the day. And needless to say, she's working on it still. So, yeah, let's make it more chatty, casual than normal. My recorder didn't work on Friday. When it went to stop recording, it froze up and then it didn't save it. So there's no recording from Friday. Alas, but the PowerPoint's up there. Right, Judith Leister. We're going to continue talking about like humorous genre scenes today, right? We'll look at Leister. We'll look at her husband Molinar. We'll look at the two peasant painters, the Van Ostade brothers. We already looked at Adrian a little bit, but we're going to look at works around here. And then I doubt we'll get there today. Jan Steen is kind of where this is all leading, right? So we're looking at her self-portrait, and we're talking about the fact that she shows herself painting the kind of painting that she's known for doing. And she's the laughing painter as well, which I love about her works. They're infectious. They want us to laugh along with her. And in the version on the right, which just sold a few months ago, she includes herself as one of the laughing musicians pointing at the children. That's what we're talking about at the end. Right? The theme of the laughing artist goes back to classical antiquity, actually. There was a painter, Zeuxis, Zeuxis, who, funny story itself, was painting an old woman who was so ugly he started to laugh. And he laughed himself to death. He died, right? Literally laughed himself to death. And I guess the moral is don't make fun of people, right? But the idea of the laughing painter goes back to, and Zeuxis was one of, the most prominent painters in antiquity, one of the greatest painters of antiquity. Hey, you made it!
Hi, yeah, sorry.
That's all right. I got your email. I didn't expect you till much later. Welcome back.
Did you get my email?
I didn't get your email. I got her email.
No, but Hirschhorn.
When did you send it?
Saturday.
Ask me after class. Ask me when we're on your clock instead of theirs.
Okay.
Did I respond to your email?
No, I was like, wow, he really left me in red.
I've been grading papers like son of a gun. Seriously, I've got like stacks and stacks. You guys are up next, right? Okay. Right. So anyway, my recording didn't work from Friday, so you'll have to just miss out for those of you who weren't here. Painting the kind of painting she's known for painting. Say that enough times, and also modeling herself after a Greek myth of a painter who, ancient Greek mythological painter Zeuxis, who was the laughing painter. Although I don't think she paints herself laughing to death, and she certainly plays with that tradition because she's not painting an old woman, right? But she does want us to participate with these. These are meant for us to laugh with, in the same way that she, the painter, laughs with them. And her picture is certainly all about her status as a painter, which the myth of Zeuxis would have added to, in that she's dressed wholly inappropriately for sitting in front of a wet oil painting, right? She's going to mess up her very expensive clothing if she continues to paint this way. So in many ways, it really is about her status, that fistful of brushes that she's carrying, looking like way too many to be holding at any given time. I think that's part of the message. The fact that she makes art in the same way that he makes music, and they're holding their hands in a similar position on a elongated thing, right? Paintbrush and bow. And that she seems to be pointing to his maleness as a symbol, right? Of he gets to do his stuff because he's a man, and I'm doing this despite being a woman in a man's world, right? I think that's really part of the theme. At the very end of class, we then looked at briefly this other image of her, again participating, right? Another self-portrait. This is over in the NMWA, the National Museum of Women in the Arts, where we see her alongside these two young boys and singing while they play. But again, obviously, very much enjoying the entire affair. Now, the idea of a woman singing with two male musicians raises other difficult sort of interpretive issues, right? Because music concerts are often overlaid with the whole idea of love, right? Or at least lust, but certainly amorous intention, right? Making music together. And the fact that she's with two men suggests the possibility of sort of suitors vying for her attention, right? And she seems to be giving it more toward the gent on the right in red than the one on the left with the violin, the one who's in fact playing the lute, which we've seen as a symbol of the female body, right? So it really, I think the the interesting thing about Leicester and many of these comic genre scenes is the way to which they set the stage, but they don't nail it down. They don't tell you this is the only way you can interpret this, right? That they leave it open for you to engage with it and come up with alternative interpretations of the works. That said, I wanted to point to a couple things about these images of lust, because they really do have a long tradition. And this weekend, you guys all sent me your list of sort of works that add to the convention. But that's something we always have to do when we look at these, is think of what were the traditions that Leicester might have known. What are the conventions for this kind of imagery? We've already seen quite a few of them, but I wanted to point a few that we haven't seen. Prints that are available in multiple. The Rijksmuseum may have this as well. I'm not sure. But Israel van Meckenem, around 1500, he's a Dutch printmaker, made a series of prints that he called Scenes of Everyday Life, or at least become known as Scenes of Everyday Life. And these images are all about courtship, and about the sort of on a certain level, they're about the war between the sexes, because one of them shows a man and a woman fighting over a pair of pants, which kind of makes it obvious, right? So in this case, she's plucking the harp and he's playing the lute, and there's a sort of amorous overtone, and there's his lute box down below, his guitar case, if you will, right, for carrying it. But these images have sort of an erotic overtone, and some of them from this series that she might have known are fairly innocent looking enough, They're just, okay, so they're playing music together. We've seen that a lot of times. But then some of them get a little bit ruder, She's pumping his organ, right? And that's kind of a rude way of saying it, right? But there you are. The actual air that makes sound is coming because she's working the bellows, right? And he plays the keys to make the sound. So there's this idea of her inspiring him. And then, to drive it all home, look what's right behind his head is an opening to the bedroom, right? So this, the nuance of the image, of the meanings, is sometimes not nuanced at all, but in fact fairly straightforward, right? And so Leicester sort of picks up on this tradition. And not only this image, but even the one that we looked at in the little painting in the Moritz house, this tiny little thing, right? It's 10 inches tall, 11 inches tall. Seems also to go back to this same tradition, this group of paintings by Van Meckenem. In this case, he's visiting a woman who's winding yarn, right? So she's got the distaff, and she's actually making the wool yarn. And so this idea of the man interrupting the woman's needlework on one level or another, right? And this one is pretty straightforward what his intentions are, right? Because he's got that big floppy feathered hat. Remember that big floppy feathered hat? That's something I should put back in the later part of this essay. But he's got a sword. There's a little cat in the corner, and she's busy spinning, right? So she's got the bob at the bottom, and she's using it to spin her yarn, right? And that ties into the whole question of sewing as a metaphor for sex, or a homophone in Dutch idioms. And with our gent on the left, notice that he's got the sword between his legs and he's playing with the hilt. And it's just like it's like Bill Murray in Caddyshack with the ball washer, if you've ever seen that, right? And it's that same metaphor, so it's quite direct and really kind of rude, right? And so Leicester has taken this idea, and with both of them, the question is whether or not the woman intends that to be the reaction to her. And that seems to be less the case with Leicester's work than this one, because she's not even looking at him. She's not even paying him any attention whatsoever. And although both of them are busily working while this male intruder has come in to interrupt their work with some other intention in mind, right? And Leicester has taken this and now just kind of opened it up a little bit by making it a little bit more vague in exactly what the meaning is that she wants. So Leicester's working in Harlem around the same time as Frans Hals is working on genre scenes, scenes of everyday life. And many of them are very, very similar in thematic content. And then around 1630, well, it's 1633 to be exact, she joins the Artists Guild, which is extraordinary in itself to be accepted into the Artists Guild, right? Because women were simply not. And I think it was in recognition of the fact that she had really made quite a career for herself by that time. 3 years later, she gets married. She marries Jan Minsa Molinar, another painter of comic musical genre scenes, right? They get married in 1636. And we've got a nice little self-portrait of Molinar as a lute player. Again, right? The same metaphors appear again and again, looking directly at us. And he's a really serious little self-portrait here, although, and Molinar, I like him well enough. I don't like him as much as Leicester, which is kind of sad because after they got married in 36, she had something like 5 kids in 12 years, and really more or less just stopped painting, which is itself quite sad. And Molinar went on painting, and like I said, I like him well enough, but he's not Judith Leister. And his works are a little bit more serious, this is a fairly serious picture, right? But we don't get the images of Molinar kind of as the laughing painter. I think there's some humor to be found in them, but not as much as there is in Leister's work. I think she's the jokester of the pair. So in this case, he's looking directly at us. He's posing as a lute player. That's not uncommon in other artists. There's a portrait of Jan Steen as a lute player. And tuning the lute. And in many ways, tuning a lute, I read, was a metaphor for a life lived in harmony, in balance. Because lutes were apparently really hard to tune and really hard to keep in tune. So one who tunes the lute is one who's managing his life well, metaphorically speaking, right? So this is a man who is living his life well. And if we look closely, you'll see he's posed next to a table with a still life, right? Only it's not your standard still life. So I read somewhere that this is like about, avoiding the pleasures of life, but I don't know. I don't get that so much because they don't seem like they're that exotic, right? We got a bunch of pipes with a bowl of coals, right? Too bad Sydney is not here. That's the same thing the little girl's carrying her De Hoop painting that she's interested in down at the NGA. But also there's some foodstuffs here, and they're not particularly elegant. And you'll also notice that there's more musical instruments to be played, right? So this is a thing to engage with in many ways, but I don't think it carries that same sort of sumptuousness that a lot of still lifes might, right? It doesn't seem as tasty, as it were, as others. But at the same time, he's deeply engaged with tuning his lute, maybe for you to join with him and pick up that violin and play on along. And certainly he does seem to be engaged with the stuff that's on the table, but at the same time not deeply interested in it. And that might be part of the message that Molinar is trying to get across. Yeah.
Kind of looks like it's moving, like the way that the knuckle is painted. It kind of like almost looks like it's not just a knuckle, but he's like.
I think he's changed his mind, right? I think what we're seeing is the swanky word for this is a pentimento. Pensive thinking, right? Pentimento is where the artist changes his mind. And what happens, we see often. I hadn't noticed that before, so thanks for pointing it out. But we can often see when we look at pictures, places where the artist has changed his mind and the paint over the course of time has gone transparent. So where it's painted over, it's not transparent. So not only do you see a thumb in 2 different places, right, he sort of moved it up, but you can also see that underneath the fingers, he's had the fingers placed in a very different fashion, right? That would account for those bluish bits that come down. And even the pinky, right, you can see was out to the side. And if we look over here at his proper left leg on your right, you can see he's changed the outline of that pretty significantly, right? And it's ghosted there now for us to see. So the sorts of things that when we were at the Rijksmuseum and we heard about using X-rays and infrared and all of that to see what's underneath the surface. Sometimes we see what's underneath our bare eye, right? And that's certainly the case here, right? That we're seeing little changes. And I hadn't noticed those before, right? But even the wrist, right, has totally changed. He's sort of thinned it out a little bit. As to why is another question, and I'm kind of interested as well. I need to go back and look at this picture more closely for two things. One, inconsequential. So I want to know if, like Rembrandt, he's dragging the heel of the brush to make his hair,
Yeah.
right? But the other one is that looks like the end of a broken string down there, right? At the end of this. And there's just one of them, so it's not like it's a stray string. You know, like you just, or maybe it is, maybe he's just restrung it, but there's also another hair string at the top that's catching the light. So I'd be curious to go back and look a little bit more closely as to whether or not all the strings are there, or if those two bits are, he's restringing it, right? And he hasn't pulled the broken string off yet, or, because again, any musical instrument with a broken string shifts its meaning almost immediately from harmony to disharmony, right? There's a fairly prominent, I don't know if he would have known it, I doubt it, a prominent painting by Hans Holbein, who is this Swiss painter who worked in England, was the court painter of Henry VIII. So the famous portraits you know of Henry VIII, my masterpiece leader, are by Holbein. And he did this painting that's in London of two ambassadors who've come to visit from France to visit the court of Henry VIII. And the reason they've come, this is 1530 or so, the reason that they've come is to negotiate peace because the Reformation has made things messy, right? Luther has messed things up. Politically as well as religiously. So there's a broker peace between France and England. And there's a lute on the table, and it's got a broken string, right? And it's laying immediately next to one of Luther's songbooks, right? So there's this idea of the disharmony in Europe that they're trying to resolve. So this one, I'm not, in the stuff I've read on it, hasn't mentioned the broken string. That's obviously changes things. It nuances it, right? It makes the initial meaning of what I talked about, what I read in the National Catalog, which was a man in charge of the harmony of his life, all of a sudden can get really whacked out, right? By the fact that there is a broken string on his lute, right? And whether or not he's restrung it or not. I can't imagine you would restring it if it's still broken because it's still stuck in the hole that the base of that string's got to go into, right? And the other half is still stuck to the machine head, to the tuning key, right? So there's no way that it could be restrung at this point. It's a lute out of whack, right? So that becomes sort of an interesting issue. I don't know if you remember this from the Frans Hals Museum. It was in that hallway, sort of by the stairs, as we were walking back on the first floor before we went up to see the great group portraits. But it's a self-portrait of Molinar. That's him standing on the right with the rest of his family. And this was painted the year before he married Judith Leister, so she's not here. I thought sure that was her sitting down. But that's his sister. She looks a lot like Judith Leister, which is kind of creepy, right? Mary, it looks like your sister. Maybe he has an ideal of beauty, and they just, I don't know. I don't know where he is with the courtship at this point, if they know each other yet, and he makes his sister look like this. But this is before they were married, and this is his extended family. So the entire family is out here making music like his genre scenes are. And the four that are in the foreground next to Molinar are his immediate sisters and brothers, right? The group there. And then the two that are behind the unplayed harpsichord in kind of shadow and fuzzy looking are his two in-laws, right, that are there. So this is really very much the extended family. And you can see that behind them there are some people posed as well, but those are all portraits of the extended family. So we have these little portraits behind their heads of different members of the family. You can see coats of arms in the back of each one of them, just like Frans Hals had painted. And there are the patriarch and matriarch of the family in larger portraits on the wall. So this is very much about dynasty, right? This is very much about legacy. And again, like Judith Leister's portrait, which is so much better, right? It's about status, right? And the connection between the artist and music, right? The visual artist and the auditory artist being connected, right? In the mind or in the visual scheme of our painter. The other two kids on the right are actually his littlest, his youngest brother and sister, right? And they appear in other Molinar pictures, and you can see the little sister is just dressed to the nines with that extraordinary ruff and looks very, very serious, but she's taken her gloves off, right? And the little boy, who seems a little bit more of a rascal, and he's so cute, right? But can you tell what he's got in his hand there? He's blowing bubbles, right? So can you see the bubble now on top of that very easily, right? So it looks like it's a shell or something, like an oyster shell that they've drilled a hole through and put a pipe on the end. And so you put, and then it'll come up on top of the bubble, right? And he's got another pipe in his hand, so maybe he blows down into it that way to blow the bubbles. But bubbles, when we see them in paintings, right, and they're a fairly common theme in genre scenes, is a scene of there was a painting in The Hague. I don't know if we looked at it very closely, where there's a little boy in the back blowing a bubble. It's a Jan Steen. And when we see kids blowing bubbles, if you just think about the property of a soap bubble, it's prone to pop, right? And you can never tell when, right? You don't know. It's going to pop. And that was therefore made the soap bubble as a very strong metaphor for the frailty of life, right? None of us know when the bubble's going to pop. None of us know when the day, what does the Bible say? None shall know the day or the hour, right? And so the bubble becomes us. Bubble becomes life itself, right? That you need to be careful. It's frail, right? Don't blow it up too big. It'll pop, right? As a warning for this. And so for all of this image of status that Molinar gives us, there's also underneath that this theme of, this is all well and good, but remember, right? Life is short, and none of us knows sort of when the end of it will come. From the Rijksmuseum, this is Leicester now. You can see how much she looks like his sister, and in fact is dressed in very similar clothing. Playing the harpsichord with the two little kids, right, that are in the corner of his family portrait on the right, have now come rushing into the room, and they're posed next to the harpsichord as Leicester is playing this. And we looked at this a little bit before, but I did want to look at a couple of things relative to it. First, above the doorway, you can see another pentimento where it looks like something was painted to the right of the tip of the triangle and has become, I'm not quite sure what it is. I've been looking at it, trying to figure that out. But the fellow coming through the door is him, right? So here's Molinar in the background coming in, and I like this, he's invading her life, right? And he's sort of interrupting her art production in a way, right? I want to read it that way, right? I don't know if that's how he intends this so much as that's how I want to read it, because that's really what happened, right? They got married, and I mean, not that she was forced into it or anything, right? But they got married, and she stopped painting. And here she's playing the harpsichord, and now she's stopped because he's come in the room with his stupid-ass kids, right? With his little brother and sister, and now I can't paint anymore. Now I can't make art. We looked at the monkey posing on the back of the virginal, of the keyboard instrument. And you'll notice that the painting on the keyboard is two lovers walking in the woods, right? So again, that theme of music and love is obviously very strong here. And the monkey posed above it, on a certain level, I wonder if it's mocking sort of traditional ideas about marriage. Or is it simply a warning? Rijksmuseum would like to tell us it's just a warning against carnal pleasure, right? But I think there's some things in this image that are about the sort of unconventionality of their relationship as two professional artists who are married. And I think the monkey above the lovers is one of them. It's also worth noting in the family portrait that we saw that behind his sister there's a harpsichord or a virginal with a painted lid. And it's also lovers walking in the woods, right? So it's the same theme, but a different painting, right? It's not the exact same painting in both of them. But that seems to be a theme then he's interested in working through in these different pictures. And with my idea that perhaps that this is an image that's investigating, questioning conventions about marriage, there is at the top a bird cage, right? Very prominently placed bird cage. And you can see here that the painting is abraded. In other words, the surface is sort of rubbed away in some parts of it. And this could come from any number of reasons. You hung it in the wrong part of the house, right? Got too hot next to the fire, right? Put it in the attic and put another box on top of it, right? Or whatever. It's been damaged. It could be a conservator back in the 18th century who overcleaned it. These are all possibilities, right? But a bird cage is, and it appears often in some of these comic genre scenes, is usually a metaphor. We find this in emblem books for the pleasures of marriage. Marriage is a pleasurable institution. And we find in emblem books 2 birds in a cage, happy to be in the cage together. And this is happy to be in a relationship, right? It beats the hell out of being free and by yourself, right? To be in a cage together is better than being alone and free, right? It's the overall metaphor, right? And that could fit with this, with Molinar coming through the door to confront his new wife. At the same time, it looks like the cage is empty, which complicates it, just like the lute with the broken string complicates the traditional reading of this. What does an empty cage mean? Well, duh, right? The bird's flown the coop, right? So freedom is better than being caged up. It's the exact opposite of the traditional message again, right? So Molinar, I think, with these pictures is, if in fact, now I'd have to be careful, right? I need to go back and read what the conservators are telling me about this, if there's traces of an underdrawing of a parrot back there somewhere, right inside the cage, or some sort of bird there. But if it's an empty cage, then it's really changes the meaning entirely, where he's taking the traditions and the conventions, he's flipping them around a bit, right? And as we think of that idea that he's taking conventions and he's sort of manipulating them and working them in his pictures, notice as well that this image of the man barging in, right, to where the woman is playing music also has a really long tradition in genre scenes, right? So the Tabork down at the NGA, which we'll come back to and talk about more fully, right, shows one of these extraordinary women in satin, and she's playing a duet with the woman in blue, we presume. And he's come through the door to a group making music. That's the same theme, but turned on its side, right? We're just sort of seeing it 90 degrees. And he's there either just to hang out with the lady in red or to play music with the lady in blue, it seems, right? That's one way to read this. And there's an unplayed cello there for him to enter into a duet, right? But there's another fellow in the back who looks like he's warming his hands by the fire. Maybe he's been playing the cello. Maybe he's getting, we don't know, right? There's all of these possibilities. But this idea of walking through the door into this scene of music making is a fairly common theme in genre scenes. And Molinar's playing with different ideas, right? And really morphing them around. Nowhere near as fun as Leicester, but not without his own interests and charms. Now, Frans Hals seems to be sort of at the heart of all of this, because these artists are all working in Harlem, right? And down at the National Gallery, we have this portrait of Adriaan van Oostade, whose works we've looked at in the past. A specialist in images of peasants in taverns. That's his primary specialty, right? Two specialties. One is peasant life in general. That's one of his specialties. But then he has a subspecialty, which he does a significant number of images of peasants in taverns, right? And we looked at this before. It's in the Rijksmuseum, or belongs to the Rijksmuseum, but it's on loan to the Frans Hals Museum, right? The Dancing Couple, where we see this rustic in very Rembrandt colors, right? browns and sort of that Caravaggio kind of highlighting. But carousing now in music being played again, people participating in with the musicians, and a link, I think, on Van Ostada's part between the musicians, the drinkers, and the painter, right? In fact, later in his career, when it comes time to paint the artist's studio, he paints it, and it looks like one of these. It looks like one of these taverns, as if he's creating these in the same environment that he's making up for the different pictures. Now, if we turn from the kind of pictures that Van Ostade painted to the portrait of Van Ostade, you see that what Frans Hals is doing is he's portraying him as a gentleman, right? He doesn't show him as an artist. Right? This is the artist with status. This is the artist whose work is not necessarily autobiographical, right? He's not a peasant himself. Could the portrait be out there specifically to counter any argument that, the artist is what he paints? Or to what degree is that idea a fabrication of later generations? Us, right? Projecting on it. We want art to be a personal expression. I want Dina's paintings to be Dina's personality, right?
Yeah.
And I want Madeline's interior designs to sort of reflect some aspect of her character. We want that, right? But that idea is not necessarily an idea that was as current in the 17th century, right? And so for Van Ostade, like all artists, they see this period that they're living in is a period when we talked about this a lot with Goltzius, right? It's a period when making art is transforming in people's minds from being a simple craft, right, to being a creative act. And the act of creation, with its similarities to God, creating the earth, right, is something that puts the artist into a different level than a saddle maker, right? Don't say that to a saddle maker, right? And so Van Ostade, for giving us all of these really fun images of peasants playing around in taverns, comes across in the portrait as a very, very serious fellow, right? Doesn't have the kind of spark that a lot of Hals's people do, because the whole point of the portrait is to portray him as a man whose art has made him into a gentleman, right? To put him in a particular class of people. So Van Ostade, studies under Hals in the 1620s in Haarlem, right? And there are other artists that are working with Hals in that same decade. And we don't know if they knew each other or not, but there was an artist named Adrian Brouwer. I love this picture. It's only like this big, right? But it's one of my favorite little things. If they ever leave it unlocked, I'm walking home with this one, right? His eyes is getting stretched out as he pulls his mouth apart. Adrian Brouwer was from Antwerp and had moved to Haarlem and had studied under Frans Hals in the 1620s as well. So he's in the shop around the same time as Van Ostade is, right? And Adrian Brouwer had already been painting, as he's working sort of in the Hals circle. He brings this sort of Flemish tradition of carousing peasants. That's really where it comes from. It's not invented by Frans Hals, and it's not really invented by Van Ostade or Adrian Brouwer. It comes from a long-standing tradition in the 16th century, in Antwerp in particular, of images of carousing peasants. So here, in the Moritzhuis and on loan from the Rijksmuseum, a bunch of drunken peasants by Adrian Brouwer from the same time period as Van Ostade, working in the circle of Frans Hals, right? So this tradition is a long-standing tradition that Van Ostade learns in the Hals shop, maybe from Hals, maybe from Brouwer, right? There seems to be a mix of artists and influences in the 1620s in Haarlem that is producing this really strong strain of genre painting in 17th century Netherlands, 17th century Holland. The root of it all is Peter Bruegel, right? Peter Bruegel was known for these images of peasant carousing. These are the same things that lie at the source of those Merry Company pictures, right? And he did paintings prints would probably be the ones that people would know, of village fairs that took you out of the city, took you to the countryside, to a small town, to witness their annual fair. And we know that people would do this. They would travel out to the countryside to see these. When I was a kid, we used to always go to different county fairs around the state, or even to the state fair. Right? Do you guys do that here as well? Like, well,
To the Orange County one.
Orange, okay, very good. And when I was in Oregon, we'd always go to the Tillamook County Fair because they had cheese, right? And we had a house near Tillamook. Well, not a house. We had a cabin in the woods that was in Tillamook County. So we'd always go to the Tillamook County Fair because we were living at the cabin over the summer, right? And it was just August. It was the high point of the summer. We didn't go back to school yet, and because we had an address in Tillamook, and we'd all gone to school in Portland, we would take our artwork down there. We would just clean house, right? In the creative side of things, because we had better teachers than they had in Tillamook at the time, right? And so we're down there bringing our Portland swagger, and would walk away with all the blue ribbons and walk back to our little cabin in the woods, right? Anyway, the whole point, of course, of going was you get to see things. It's kind of cool. It's fun. There's celebrations. There's music, right? There's performances, and everybody kind of lets their hair down. And Brugge in the 16th century, even more so, right? So in this case, the crossbowmen of St. George, the archers of St. George, have thrown a party in this town, and Brugge gives us this sort of aerial view down, right? This is the source of your Overkamp, right? It's very much the same sort of idea. We look at everything in the distant landscape. In the background, you see them having the shooting contest. You would put a bird, a little fake bird, right? Stuffed bird at the top of a pole, and everybody would shoot at it. Seems kind of dangerous because you get the sense that those arrows are coming back down again, right, at some point. But that's what the base run is. That's in the background, right? And in the foreground on the right is where they meet. But if you look everywhere we look, we have dancing figures. We've got wonderful. There's so much fun to explore. You know, I love this little joust. They're reenacting St. George and the Dragon. So here's St. George on a horseback, and here's a guy with a fake dragon, right? A little theatrical dragon. And there's the maiden he's going to rescue, right? And then back here we have more theatrical productions going on. But everywhere we look, we have these peasants dancing and carousing, right? Around a sword dance here, where they would run underneath the swords as they're dancing, and figures flopping around and playing, and children and dances. And this is a distillation of that idea, right? So Brouwer was kind of crucial in bringing this to the North Netherlands, to Holland, right? And particularly to Haarlem, where Van Ostade gets it, maybe the conduit by which Frans Hals gets it, right? This is an important conduit. So it's a long-standing tradition that at the time that our Dutch artists are picking it up. And Van Ostade continues to do this kind of scene through his entire career. Now, this is much later, right? Look at how much time has passed between this. If the early date on that is right, we're talking 35 years later, right? And even if the later date on that is right, we're talking 20 years later. Okay, so it's later in his career. And if we look at this how do they compare? I mean, their tonal range is similar, but let's look at the activities in the inn. Do they compare well? Do they both have the same sort of attitude toward the peasant, toward the activity? Do we see the same things going on in both of them? Or are you saying no? How would you characterize the one on the left in comparison to the one on the right?
The one on the left is very tame. They're all playing cards and smoking rather than dancing and drinking.
It's not noisy, is it? Doesn't have that same sense of boisterousness. Yeah, nobody's up on the top of the table, right? We're still drinking and smoking, and they are in the right as well, but they're not carousing, right? And if we go back to, right, they're not puking. That woman in the foreground seems like she's spitting, right, up, right? They're a significantly more civil, right? And people have done studies on this and suggested that social attitudes towards villagers had changed in the course of the 17th century. We moved from early part of the 17th century, where villagers were seen as vulgar, uncivilized people, to later in the 17th century, where villagers are seen differently. And I think it might have to do with the end of the war, where villagers are seen as true examples of the heritage of Holland, right? They're closer to their roots, and thus more noble in a way, right? They're less polluted by urbanization, right? They are, in fact, what made Holland great in the first place. And as we poke our noses around this picture, right, what we see, of course, is card playing and drinking, definitely. And this is difficult. The same thing we saw with Molinar, Leicester even. Card playing is rarely good. Right? In almost every picture where we've seen card playing, we've talked about it as a negative activity. Right? Because usually it's paired with people who are fallen over drunk. Right? In some of those merry companies, we have cards strewn on the floor as people fall out of their chairs, you know? But here, it seems to be a rather civilized game, right? They're playing by the rules. And maybe that's what the picture's all about, is playing by the rules. We have smokers, we have drinkers, but they're not over the top, right? Nobody seems to be obviously cheating so far as I can tell, right? Everybody's looking at their own cards, right? Not at each other. We might have a kibitzer out there, the guy who's just out of my detail, right? Is leaning in and looking, but at the same time, it doesn't. Sometimes with these images, it's obvious that somebody's the stooge, like somebody's being taken advantage of. And I don't think that Van Ostade does that for us. We see more gamesmanship, games playing in the background. Looks like backgammon to me, right? They called that trick track, I think, in the 17th century, backgammon. And you can see the window up above that some of the panes are broken out of the window. And even though it's run down, right, it doesn't look horribly decrepit, you know? The lack of the windows is part of it being typified or characterized as a peasant interior, right? Little boy gathering wood for the fire, right? Cleaning up, as it were, around the place. And I think that's part of the hallmark. And I particularly like the degree to which this figure on the left sort of sets the tone. You know, warming his feet by the fire. There's this Dutch word. I don't know if I told you guys. Did I tell you guys the word gezellig? Gezellig, gezellig. It's comfy. There isn't a good English word. It's comfy, right? But not really comfy. It's more than that, right? It's warm and convivial. It's a brown bar in Amsterdam, is gezellig, right? Those of you who walked to the first day we were there after we got done with the Royal Palace, and Mariah took some of us to a little place that had carpets on top of the tables, right? It was very gezellig, right? Really comfy, right? And with a fire and brown walls, and right? And you probably went to other places on your own that were exactly the same way, right? Amsterdam can be very gezellig. And this is a gezellig interior, right? And the figure with the fire is, I think, on a certain level, the motif that establishes the mood for the entire picture. Adrian van Ostade also did exterior scenes, and we're fortunate. I think this is maybe in many ways the better painting of the two. A cottage dooryard. This is not a inn. This is a family residence. This is the yard, the backyard, if you will, of a family residence. And again, like our inn, you could almost imagine the window up above being the outside of this, right? But it's a well-kept, well-maintained, not entirely wealthy household, right? And everything is in its place. And I think that's the theme that Van Ostade is trying to get across, is that everything is in its place. So, laundry, it's torn and it's tattered, but it's clean, right? Hung up to dry in the yard. There's a dustbin out here and a broom, right? It's not paved, it's dirt, but they sweep the dirt, right? I had a friend who went on mission to Africa, and he was struck by the fact that at the village he was in, they would sweep the dirt in front of the houses, right? You want to keep the dust away, right? Even though it's a dirt floor, tight packed dirt floor. So everything here is well maintained and well organized. And I think that the theme of the picture is family harmony, right? Is domestic duty, is a life well lived where everything is in place. So we've got a family with 4 children, and the children are paired up into little pairs, right? And here a little boy, again, mismatched socks falling down. They're not rich. Playing with the puppy and his little daughter, right? Whereas on the opposite side, we see the older sister playing with the youngest daughter. So everybody is sort of dutifully, diligently taking care of the rest of the family. There's our broom as well, right? And it's just a charming scene. If we think about family duties and whatnot, there's the daughter with the baby, taking care of the baby so mom can do her job. She's shucking mussels, right? Not shucking them. You know, mussels, they grow with a bit of vine that, I'm doing this by my mouth for some reason, but a mussel has a little bit of vine that attaches it to the rock, right? So it holds on. It's called a beard, right? And when you buy mussels, when you get them fresh, when we buy them at Safeway, they've all been cleaned, right? But if you get them fresh, they'll have the beard. And you've got to cut it off because it's with a really sharp knife because it's inedible and pull it out, right? So that's one of the first things you do if you get really fresh mussels is you get rid of the beard. And that's what mom's doing, right? She's getting rid of the beards on the mussels. And the daughter on the left is doing her job by playing with the baby so mom can go about her business because it's a sharp knife and it's, don't want to give it over to the kids. And there's dad, presumably coming back from market, but standing right in the doorway, which is key, right? He's the liaison between the household and the outdoors, right? And that's his job, is to move in and out, right? To stand on the threshold. And on a certain level, to protect. The way he's got his arms together, right? Leaning into the door. He's like the door itself. He's the protection between this convivial household and the nasty world outside. I also like how the carrots are up on the shelf, and again, not directly on it, but on a nice clean rag, so that the chicken down below doesn't get them. They're probably part of their dinner, right? Everything's in its place. And then again, broken windows, which is not meant to put them down, but just to sort of help characterize this. This is not an extraordinarily wealthy place. Small windows, you can deal with cracks like that, right? It's not going to kill you, especially in the summer when you can leave the shutters open, right? You'll fix those when you get enough money. Right now, there's other things to spend your money on. So Van Ostad is a specialist, right, in a particular kind of genre scene, peasant genre scenes that pick up on some of the charm of these things that Hals had been doing. He was also active in Harlem, right, and carving out a part of that market. He also taught painters. He had a little brother named Isaac. And we didn't see none of these were on view in the Rijksmuseum when we were there, but there was 1 or 2 on view at the Moritz house in that overwhelming group of pictures. And we got 2 of them on view right now down at the National Gallery by his little brother Isaac. And he was younger enough than Adrian to actually study under Adrian, right? They're not like my little brother's 2 years younger than me. I still call him, he's in his mid-50s, and I still call him my little brother, right? But we're only 2 years apart, and that's kind of normal, right? 2 or 3 years apart for brothers. But they're significantly far apart, right? And Isaac's like 20 years younger or so, and studies under Adrian as he's becoming a professional painter. Dies very young, only 28 years old when he died, right? Isaac was, sadly. But you can see from looking at these side by side how much he owes to Adrian. Right? We're not in the courtyard now. We're on a street, right? And this is sort of the alley behind the public street, right? But if you look at the facade of Isaac's inn and compare it to the rear facade of Adrian's courtyard, with the ivy growing and the interest in the bricks and the sort of lack of a single straight line anywhere in the building, right? There's something about these pictures that is almost like Thomas Kincaid, the painter of light, or something like that. They're just sort of, they're almost like a motel art, right? In the fact that they're so cloyingly charming on a certain level, right? But again, there had been a huge market for these in the 17th century. So a lot of the style that we see in Isaac is coming out of Adrian. Isaac is, if anything, a little bit better as a landscape painter. He has atmosphere, time of day, lighting, a little bit stronger than Adrian, because Adrian is mostly interiors, right? And what we see is, just as Adrian gives us this well-run household, right? Isaac gives us a well-run public establishment. And this could be the outside of any one of Adrian's later inns, right? Where it's all well-run on the inside. And here, well-run on the outside. So what are we looking at here? The morning deliveries, right? This is the inn, and we know it's an inn because it's got a sign hanging outside the door. And there's actually a pot in a ring over the door. This is an inn, right? So it's both a restaurant and a hotel, right? The sort of thing that you can, it's an Airbnb. Not really, that doesn't work, does it? Because they don't serve food, right? But British inns will have both, right? A little hotel with a restaurant downstairs. The French have what they're called relais, R-E-L-A-I-S, and that's exactly the same thing. I stayed at one once and with my wife, and they were mad that we didn't want to stay for dinner, that we wanted to go into town. It's like, you're not staying for dinner? You know, because they pride themselves on their cooking, and that's, you get the sense here. So we have a little sign above the doorway of the inn, a pot there, and there's our innkeeper leaning out. Again, a bird cage, that symbol we've talked about before, is sort of, it's okay to be nested up, right? And he's watching as the morning deliveries are coming in, and they're getting beer in barrels, right, to serve to customers. So we have this horse with a sledge, right? Doesn't have wheels or anything. And they're offloading now these heavy barrels of beer that they're going to now put in the basement of the inn. So the horse is pulled up, and the man is beginning to work toward offloading those different casks of microbrew beer, right? And the little figure on the right is leaning out and getting the stairway ready so that they can take them down, and they pick up the empties to take back with them, right? And for a painting buyer, right, this is not their experience. This is not their life, right? The people who owned this would have been wealthier patrons in the city. So this is a visual escapism, right? This allows us to go and visit this harmonious village environment where everybody gets along, right? And there is a stork built a nest on top of the chimney. And the idea of a stork building a nest is a symbol of a sort of a safe haven, right? It's found a place to lay its eggs, right? And that typifies our inn as a place to lay your eggs, right? A place that's safe to stop. So there's no sort of moral warning about this so far as we can tell. There's not a dangerous place where we should pass by. The beer that we see being offloaded is perfectly okay to partake in, right? And as we look around, we find all sorts of things going on around the outside of it. I love the dogs, right? And there's a certain sense that the harmony that the people have found has not really reached the animal world yet, right? The dogs are growling, and it looks like they're kind of fighting over a bone, but maybe it's friendly fighting as well. You know, ours do that once a day at least, give us a little show. And it's usually over just a rag that one of them has picked up, and that's kind of the same thing here. But behind it, right, we see a little boy with a third dog trying to keep him away from those other two, right? Don't engage with that behavior. And then we see the impoverished people of the town. And they're sort of character types that we find in other Dutch art. So we've got a cripple, right, walking, and his foot is so bad, probably gout, that he can't actually put any weight on it, right? And so he's got a peg leg. And he's not like trying to trick anybody, right? He's not pretending that he's an amputee or anything because it's so obvious, right? He just can't put weight on that foot. So And you've seen these days they give you a little like a skateboard, right, with a stick on it that you put your foot on. I've seen people have to walk around with one of these and kick your way around. It's kind of fun. But here, our impoverished fellow, right, with his foot on a peg, and Rembrandt did these, right. And there's a fellow here with the same idea. He's got his foot behind him on that peg leg, right. So these sorts of people were fairly common to see, and Van Ostade enlivens his inn with these images of the impoverished people around them. Rembrandt probably saw this either in Leiden or in Amsterdam, just on the streets there. Behind the peg leg fellow is a woman making pancakes. Did you guys go get profitjes? Those little.
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah, right.
Those things are like
Heaven.
they're addicting.
Yeah. Well, that's what she's making, right? Is the sort of the original version of these sorts of things. She's a pancake seller, and we see behind there that she's got the kids. They can't wait to get their little sweet, doughy,
They're so good.
wonderful things, right? And the kid in the foreground in the Rembrandt print, right, trying to keep his away from the puppy. There, you didn't like them?
No, I didn't get.
You didn't get one. I didn't either. Which will make my cardiologist happy that I didn't go after
Apparently
those.
you can like get like a pan, like at like Bed Bath and Beyond or something. Like you can make them.
For making, I think all you need is a cast iron pan, really. You know, the point is getting the squeezy bottle, because it's got a lot of egg in it, right?
Yeah.
And to make the little thing, and so that way they puff up, right? Well, anyway, the bottom line is that Van Ostade is including these characters, right, that are fairly common characters in genre scenes that we find in Rembrandt prints and in other images as well, that enliven this in and sort of give, again, your owner of the picture sort of a world view, if you will, of all the kind of people that live in this little town, right? If we look further in the background, there's a fellow there with what looks like an easel and a painting on it, doesn't it? But that's not what it is. That's a signboard, right? And what he is he's selling something, right? He's selling goods. And he's usually identified as a quack, like a doctor who's selling fake remedies, right? Step right up, my tonic, the beginning of Wizard of Oz, right? The guy who ends up being the wizard is traveling around with the wagon, and he's got this tonic, and he's going to, try and hawk it. That's the same idea. The sort of the miracle cure-all. Drink this and you'll be better, right? And that's what he is in the background. And again, these can be found in all sorts of different images. Here's a Rembrandt print of a quack. It's great, isn't it? Rembrandt prints are the greatest thing in the world, I think. Those are collector's marks at the top and the bottom. Those aren't Rembrandts. Those are later collectors stamped their mark on it. But here it is. I got it here. Snake oil, right? It's exactly what you need to make you feel better. And his brother Adrian even did paintings of the quack. I think this is in the Moritz house, right? An image of a quack trying to sell his stuff. And it's included in the back. And it's all part of the vibrancy in the life of the village. And this is exactly why people would visit these things, right? The other image by Isaac Van Ostade at the MGA shows urban visitors coming and stopping, right? It's another inn, but in this case, instead of the inn being stocked, we're now seeing the customers arriving. And what we see is, of course, an inn that's really happy, really charming, sleeping dog, loading your pipe, all sorts of activity going on, people with all the time in the world to lean out their window and gossip, right? But it's certainly not at all a dangerous place. This is a happy place to visit. Although I think the guy in blue is pissing against the fence back there. I mean, why else do you turn your back to everything? Why else do you do this against a wall, unless that's what you're up to? Right? But I don't think it makes it a dangerous place entirely. But again, I think like our other genre scenes, it's complicated. We have two very wealthy fellows, dressed very different than everybody else, in black and in yellow, who have rode up on their horses and are in the process of dismounting to take presumably a room, or at least a beer, right, at the inn. And I think that part of Van Ostada's message, Isaac Van Ostada's message, is to sort of talk about this as being a convivial experience, a pleasant experience, but one that isn't without conflict and danger, potentially, right? Because you see, as soon as these guys ride up, out come the beggars, right? Asking for money for her and her kids. Can you please spare a little bit of extra cash? Because look at how you're dressed compared to me. Right? So there is for the urban dweller this joy mixed with anxiety, right, about the image. And for Van Ostade, the issue with this comes from the fact that, again, these kinds of images of inns, especially with urban people passing them by, there's a long tradition of this, right? Van Ostade didn't make up this kind of image. And when we look at the tradition, have we seen this before in this class? This is in Rotterdam. I wanted to go to Rotterdam just to see this, actually. We have a picture by Bosch in the National Gallery, and this is the opposite side of the same panel, right? And it shows a wayfarer, maybe the prodigal son, not specific, coming on this path, and he's moving his way around. He's about to go through a gate with an angry cow, right? Snarling dog behind him. Again, you can see he's changed his mind. He's made the dog a bit smaller and it's kind of faded. And he's passing by an inn. He's not actually stopping. So he's being diligent. And that inn in the Bosch picture is put forth as a very nasty little place. There's a guy groping a woman's breast in the doorway, right? A woman leaning out a window. A man peeing on the fence. And you can see that Van Ostade has picked up all these things, right? He's gotten all these traditional elements come out. There's a figure in the window, right? There maybe isn't somebody groping inside the doorway, but there is definitely the dogs, right? And there's the figure peeing against the fence. In the other picture that we saw the bird cage on the outside, right? He's really drawing on these conventions and these traditions, but he's opening up the meaning, right? He's not. Bosch is very moralizing. This has got one meaning. Life is a journey. Don't get distracted, right? That's the message. And if you get distracted, you're in trouble, just like the prodigal son, right? Don't take your money and squander it with useless, wasteful behavior. Move ahead despite the dangers, right? For Van Ostade, that's not there. It's possibly there, right? But he doesn't necessarily hit you over the head with it. You can enjoy this just as much. Maybe it's about Calvinist restraint. That it's all well and good as long as you don't go out and get trashed, right, in the process of doing this. One last detail from this, just to sort of drive this point home. You'll notice that he pairs the peak of the inn with the church steeple right behind it. And you'll notice that next to the church steeple there is a Gothic gable here that mirrors the gable of the inn. So he's presenting us a sort of visual dichotomy between a religious structure and a secular structure, right? Both of which serve wine, right? But for very, very different purposes. And I think that on a certain level, he's saying to us that these things, that there is this idea of choices in life. And that sometimes they might come loaded with potential ramifications. But at the same time, he's not hammering us with that particular idea. Right? He's leaving it open to us. Right. So Isaac Van Ostade studied under his brother Adrian. Jan Steen studied under Adrian at the same time as Isaac, right? So there's a good chance that they knew each other. Right? And we looked a lot at Jan Steen already. I wanted to look at things related to the pictures in the National Gallery. And so this one was in the Frans Hals Museum, and it's another of these images that take us away from the city and out to a peasant village in the country, where we can visually enjoy being out here. And this is one of, 3 or 4 types of images that he does. Ashir is working with these holiday images and interiors, right? But we saw all of the, as the old sing, so pipe the young images that are so similar. There's all those doctor's visits that we saw so many of. And so we shouldn't be surprised when we find out that he did a lot of these as well, right? Different variations of the same theme. And it's very much like those those Bruegel prints that we were looking at, right? This is a way to go out and sort of visually experience the peasant carnival, right? The Dutch word for this is a kermis, Kermis, the Dutch peasant carnival. And it's a place of merriment. It's a place of fun, a place to go sing, dance, and drink, eat, right? And people are coming from all over to do this. And it centers on this dancing couple. And you can see this picture's a bit of a wreck, right? Look at how badly worn the paint is around the pants and the dress of this couple, right? The canvas is coming through because it's been so badly abraded. And you can even see in her face that a lot of the paint that would have modeled it in 3 dimensions, we know that stain can do that, right? It's just simply worn away over time, right? It's not in the best of shape. But at the same time, it shows us now our young man leading this woman out to dance, and you can see she looks a little maybe skeptical about the whole thing, right? But they seem like she's gonna join him, right? In this, and Stain gives us the musicians playing, so we can hear this with bagpipes. Again, peasantry and bagpipes. We talked about that last week when we looked at Terbruggen, right? That great shepherd image down at the NGA. And people coming from far and wide, right? They just can't wait to get here to join in the party as they work their way toward the music. They've sort of heard the sound, and they're coming up in wagons and on horses and on foot to join in the party, which is kind of, I think, on a certain level what he wants us to do, to join in the party. And parts of it are, straight up. Parts of it are sort of okay for the most part, right? On one level, we have people smoking and drinking and eating herring. Did anybody have a herring when we were there? Me neither. Pickled herring, right? They're raw and fermented, right? But they're supposed to be wonderful. I didn't quite feel solid enough in the stomach to give that a go.
The description doesn't sound.
Yeah, no. Well, there was a herring stand just on the single, right? As you get out of the hotel, if you went out the hotel to the right and went across under that underpass, right? Right there on that bridge was a huge herring stand. They love them. Anyway, long story short, right? There they are and they're served at fairs. That's a common thing at fairs. We get cotton candy, right? Snow cones, calories in a cup, right? They would have things like that. And I guess the way you eat it, I know, but here's how you eat it. This will make it even worse for you, Dina. The way you're supposed to eat it is you do this. Yeah, and then take the whole thing down like a sword swallower. And then, well, since it's pickled, I think the bones get soft, but I haven't done it, so I'm not 100%. I think you're supposed to pull out the spine. Yeah, and just eat the fish off of it. Head and all. Right? I know, it's not, I didn't do it. Cool. Go back. Right? Sleeping dog, again, very cute, but you'll notice what she do. She go in the bathroom next to the building, right? So there's again this idea of, like we saw with Isaac and those, there's this question of good or bad, right? How are we supposed to view this this activity? And there seems to be a sort of what do you want to say, a mixture of some that are good and some that are bad. And here's a guy behind here, sort of can't wait to get out of everybody's sight with that girl back there, right? There's amorous pursuits going on, and then there's some sort of more obvious thing. Try that one more time. That's not much. It's getting a little bit better. Right, one more time. Hey, there it goes. Right. He had so much to drink, he fell asleep with the pigs. Right. He's in the pigsty. In case you miss it, right? There's a little boy pointing at it as well. Right. So there is this sense that again, there's a message about restraint versus overdoing it, which is a common Dutch pursuit. And with these, I think this, in many ways, we're seeing lots of people that have overdone it, right? The woman that can't find the proper place to pee. And by the way, we saw the Rembrandt, didn't we? The etching of the woman making water. Didn't we see that in this class? Did I show that to you guys? There's a Rembrandt print of a woman peeing.
Yeah, we saw.
Yeah, you saw that. And the man peeing, right? Okay. And she's in almost the exact same position as this one, right? I wonder if he knows the Rembrandt print. And then left corner, right? Oh, Dad's had too much. Better get him home, right? And everybody's helping out. The little kid's got his coat, and his hat. And his daughter and his wife are carrying him off. And everybody's looking out for him, and they're kind of laughing at him. But boy, is he's going to feel it tomorrow, right? And that, again, seems to be part of the theme. I think we'll wrap up with this. It all comes out of Bruegel. I mean, all of these themes that he's working with are themes that have a 100-year tradition at this time. So this is another of these village fairs, right? In this case, we still see actors in the background and wagons rolling up, which we have in the background here. We have people carousing around the inn. What's he doing? Peeing against the wall, right? And where is she? Back here, right? Taking a dump on the church, right? And all of these things come up. There's our swine, right? Our pigs. There's our dancing going on, right? And for Bruegel, these are places to go get away from it all. And kind of enjoy this for a bit because it's okay to do it here, but not in Amsterdam, right? Or in his case, in Antwerp, right? Or Brussels, because they know this, right? The Dutch authorities are all over this. They hate those British tourists who are coming down for the weekend and getting drunk, right? There's huge. When I went there in the 80s, it was a lot worse than it is now. The red light district was much more dangerous. I almost got mugged. There was guys on another bridge. They started running in our direction, so we hid. I was scared when I went in October, thinking, how am I going to take this group here? Right?
Wait, that was in October?
No, that was when I went in the 80s, when it was 85. No, and so I went back in October, I was like, okay, it's going to be okay. Yeah, because it's changed so much, because the Dutch authorities are cracking down. One of the ways they're cracking down is there's a monster fine, payable on the spot. They take credit cards for public urination. Because they just got sick and tired of it. People coming down drinking way too much Heineken, right? Smoking some doobie, going out to look at the women in the windows and peeing in a canal, right? They really wanted to clean that up, but now you can swim in the canals. I wouldn't do it, but they say you can, right? And that the water's gotten that clean. You can't swim in the Potomac around here. It's a much bigger river. So they've done a great job of cleaning it up, and part of it is that, so going back to it, right, these images are about blending it all out for a little bit so you go back and you behave, right, in society when you get back, right? That's kind of what happens at, think about all those TV shows about islands, right? Love Island and whatnot. They call it on 30 Rock was MILF Island, right? But that was one of the shows they came up with. Anyway, there you get the same idea, right? So there's nothing in here that you can't find in a Bruegel somewhere, right? In all of the motifs that he's doing. And what Steen has done, like the other painters that we've talked about, is he's mixed it up, right? And down at the National Gallery, we've got one that was so similar to this, right? In thematic content. And it's huge, right? It's almost 6 feet across, right? So it's a very, very, very large picture. And we'll talk about it in depth on Friday, our next class, right? I'm not quite sure where we're going from there. I'm trying to think. We might just stay with genre scenes for a bit and sort of look at the more restrained ones, because that seems like a good place to stay. I'll figure it out where we're headed from there. I plan to get you guys comments back on your lists that you sent me. I was going to do it today, but 3 hours of paperwork this morning got in the way of that. So I'm thinking tomorrow I don't have any meetings for like the first time in a month. Fingers crossed you'll get those back, and maybe even your resident expert papers as well. Right? Okay? And you got Amsterdam essays too. Yeah, lots of things coming your way.
Do it midnight.
Sorry?
Do it midnight.
Do it midnight tonight, right. So you probably won't get those back tomorrow. One thing at a time, right?
Unless.
And the important thing is to get those lists of conventional works back to you so that you have an idea in case there's something more out there that I think you should be looking at. Okay, I'll see you guys on Friday.